Go.
And we are live once again. Welcome back to Thursday night Soaring Profits. Tonight we have a wonderful, just incredible guest who has a full life story that I'm very interested in getting into, because I think people out there will not only learn a lot about recovering from tragedies in life, but also maybe even be able to find help in his organization. Bob McCabe, in his lifetime, went through a lot of tragedy and fell upon that point of impact that I always talk about, that point where you're at your lowest low and you have to move forward, and you have to either, kind of give up or make something better. And Bob, being the champion and hero that he really is, not only is willing to share his story, but also is sharing it with people to make an impact, to change lives. He has started recoveryspeaking.org. It's down at the bottom. I encourage you to go see it. It's a men's group that meets Thursday nights on Zoom, and they discuss recovering from sexual assault, which is a huge topic, especially with men, because I know it's hard for men to share feelings, let alone share something so intimate as that. And I think, Bob McCabe, I think it is just heroic that you're not only willing to share your story, but help other men share their stories and try to get the recovery and the success that you obviously have. Bob, I was wondering if maybe you could tell our viewers here a little bit about your story and how you went from, like you've told me, a very low place in life, and turning that into such a success.
Wow. Okay. I just want to know who's going to order breakfast, because we may not be out of there here till then. First of all, James, Patrick, thank you so much. It's an honor and a privilege to be here on Soaring Profits. And my good friend Lisa, who was with you just a couple of weeks back, who is actually on my board of directors as well, is the one that snafu'd me and said, "You are going to do this show." Perfect. And Lisa, if you're listening, thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna just kind of preface it by saying, guys, that for any of the listeners that are out there, we're going to talk about matters that are very difficult. We're going to talk, and we're going to kind of hit head on some issues that have to be discussed, which are difficult to discuss. But we will not go into any actual details of the sexual abuse or anything like that. So anybody who may be listening, there's just a little note for you that you don't have to worry about that. And certainly, if anybody is troubled at the end of this, maybe we could put up either the info at recoveryspeaking.org, and I would get back to them personally tonight or tomorrow, and we could talk about it so they're not going through that on their own. Okay, should start off with saying I live in Guelph at the present time, and I've been here since 2009. Originally from Toronto, fifth and sixth kids, a good Irish Catholic family, it was a middle class family growing up in the 50s and 60s. I'm 70 years old, so the math means I was born in 1952, and it was just one of those times where within the institution of the Catholic Church, when I was growing up, man, you just don't mess with the Catholic mom, right? You go to church when she tells you to go to church, and you go there with your missal, and you go at Easter, you're there 4 or 5 times a day, 7 days a week, and you're crossing yourself before you go to the bathroom, for crying out loud. It's just very intense. And in that culture, one of the things that we were always taught is you never question the priest. The priest is next to God. You just don't do it. It's a little bit different in the culture today. So I say that to preface what the era and the time was like. I was born in 1952. By late 1950s, I wanted to follow the kind of the path my older brother had taken and go on the Altar Society, which I did. And so it was about 1959 when I was about 7 years of age that I started training to go on the Altar Society and serve mass, as we would call it at the time. And at that point in time, a new priest came to our parish in 1962, and his name, and I have the right to say it. It's everything is cool. His name was Father Alphonse Robert, and it was a parish called St. Lawrence Parish in Scarborough, Ontario. And he was ordained out of St. Augustine Seminary in 1962, June of 1962. And our parish was the first parish that he had come to. He was given the job of looking after the Altar Society. So he ran our practices every week. And one of the things that started within the first month of knowing him was what I now know. I didn't know it at the time at the age of 10 when he came to our parish. But what he started doing was grooming me. And that would entail just paying a lot of attention to me. And all of a sudden, the priest is paying attention to me. And I was, I wasn't a lonely kid, but I was a loner. And there was just something that, when I get talking about my alcoholism, maybe it'll make a little more sense. But it was like, the mothership passed and dropped me on the wrong planet. You know what I'm saying? And anytime the mothership is going to be coming back and pick me up. And I just didn't seem, even as a young child, I didn't seem to really connect the way it appeared to me, but that other people were connecting, or my brothers and sisters were connecting. So anyway, this started happening. And again, it's stuff where all of a sudden the hugs would happen and the cheek to cheek stuff and a little kiss on the cheek. And there was never anything outrageous, but it was still really uncomfortable. And I knew it almost immediately. But at the same time, you don't question the priest. And my thinking was, and I can remember thinking this at 10 years of age, boy, this is uncomfortable. Maybe it's just me. Maybe this is what's supposed to happen, but it's just me. So after a year of this, and then him continuing to groom me, he also groomed my parents, more so my mom. And he would come over to the house and he would have tea and they would talk religion and read passages of the Bible. And so when in the summer of 1963, he came to my mom and said, geez, you know what? It'd be great for little Bobby to go on a trip to Montreal with me. I got some business at Notre Dame Cathedral. It's now a basilica, but it was a cathedral at the time. My mom didn't think twice about it. Didn't think twice. Of course, who could he be safer with than a Catholic priest? And, even at the time, there was a hesitancy that I had, but nothing enough. And I never said anything to my parents about my uneasiness. And I just said, oh, it's me, I'll go. And so we got in the car, and I won't go into all the detail, but, on the drive, he started talking about sexual matters with regard to, sexual acts and how to masturbate and how he does and all of this stuff, and then sexual intercourse. And I knew nothing. In 1963, what kids know at 10 years old today would have been a university student in 1963. We didn't have access to all this social media. We didn't have, and I don't know if that's better or worse. I'm not judging it, but I knew nothing about this stuff. So when he's talking, I am really uncomfortable, and he's going into graphic detail, which I won't hear unless you guys ask me to. But it was unnerving. So we drove from Toronto, we got to Cornwall. And when we got into Cornwall, he went off and he pulled into this motel and said, we're going to stay here for the night, wait here. And he goes to the place and gets the key. And I'm wondering why I had to wait in the car. But then we go to the motel room and he opens it up and I look in and there's one double bed. And I turned to him and I said, Father, there's only one double bed. And he said, that's all we're going to need. And I just kind of sat back and I went, okay. Didn't think, again, really uncomfortable. But I can't speak out. I don't have a voice. Right. And so I can't even remember what we did from the time we went into the room, checked out. We must have gone maybe to swim or have something to eat or something like that. The sexual abuse took place that night and throughout the entire night. And it was oral. It was significant. And at one point, all that I'll go into is at the time that the abuse was taking place, it was like I went possum is the phrase I use, but I just played dead. I was afraid to move. And anybody who may have experienced abuse in the past may know what I'm talking about. And it's a protectionism. That's something which I've learned later. The body shuts down just to protect ourselves because the trauma is so deep and the fear is so deep from what we're experiencing. And so I was just absolutely frozen. And it was probably close to an hour until there was he made a move, and I was able to shift, and he kind of like was surprised I was awake or something. I got up and went to the washroom, and as I was at the sink in the washroom, there was a small mirror over top, and behind me was the door. And then he came to the door completely naked with an erection, and made a couple of comments on his manhood, and went back to the bed. I went out and sat in this little chair that was there, and he kept trying to get me to come back to bed. I won't do anything else. Come on, it'll be safe. We'll go. I sat in that chair for the rest of the night. Mm-hmm. And I could not go to sleep. I was petrified, frozen. I don't remember the morning. I don't remember driving from Cornwall to Montreal. We got into Montreal, and I remember just being in the basilica. And we were standing in the basilica. And if you know that, if you've been there at all, there's the one huge altar at the front, a lot of gold. Church likes gold. It must be a Trumpian thing or something, but there's a lot of gold stuff going on. And there's all these side altars along the side. So we were over by one of the side altars. And this man, and this always gets me, this man, after sexually abusing me for hours the night before, has the audacity to turn to me and says, "There's a confessional here. Do you want me to hear your confession?" At 11 years old, I wanted to scream at this man. I wanted to just tear him apart. But you know what, 11 years old I did? No, Father. And I hated myself. And I knew there was something I didn't like, but I now have language that I can put to those feelings even this far later. So later, like we went in, he took me into the back where I could get a surplice and satan so I could serve mass. And he's kind of introducing me to these priests, and he's rubbing my shoulders, and he's doing all this grooming type behavior. We go back and we say mass. And at that time in the 60s, the priest had his back to you. And so I was kneeling, serving mass, and all I could do was look at him. And just, I wanted him dead. My prayer during that mass was, "God, please kill Father Alphonse Robert." And then we finished, and we went to the back. And somehow I said to him at that point, "I just want to go home. I just want to go home." And so there's periods of time when you go through this kind of trauma, gentlemen, that just black out. And there's periods of time that I have no recollection of, even through all the trauma therapy I've done and everything else. And I don't know if I'll ever get those moments back. And I'm almost afraid if I do, to be honest with you. But all I remember is driving back, and it was daytime again. I don't remember staying there again a second night. Maybe we did. I just have no recollection of it. Summer, so maybe it was still late. And we got back into Toronto, and I remember I lived at Birchmount and Lawrence in Scarborough. And I ran up the driveway, and as I'm telling you this now, I can see me. And I had my black running shoes on, a pair of blue shorts, and a striped shirt. And I remember saying to myself, I can never tell anybody what happened. Who's going to believe me? He is a priest. He is next to God. Who is going to believe me? And that's almost verbatim. I remember running up the driveway now, running up the sidewalk, climbing the 3-4 stairs, putting my hand on the doorknob of my front door, turning it, and I do not remember walking in. I do not remember seeing my mom and dad. I do not remember talking to anybody about the trip. It's like a blackout, which later in life I was too experience quite often. But it was just, there was no recollection whatsoever of the timeline. So fast forward now, I get into my teens, I start getting booze, and I'm just trying to push this thing down because real men don't worry about this. And in the 60s, Marlboro, man, this is what you do. So all of a sudden I find alcohol. And I take a drink of alcohol, and it was almost like this, guys, and this is water, by the way. I can breathe. And I don't remember my first drink like a lot of alcoholics do. I just remember the feeling, and I said, I'm going to do a lot of that. And that's one of the few promises I kept. And so I started drinking, and by the age of 22, I was drinking alcoholically, and I was full-blown alcoholic by 25. And I was able to keep it going. I was holding down some good jobs. I was, they call it functional, if I laugh about that, but sure. And know who says I was a functional alcoholic? The alcoholic. Anyway, so I burned through. I got married in 76. I got divorced in 86. I came to Toronto and did some work out of Toronto for 5 years. And by the early 90s, man, I was a mess. I could not hold down a job. I'm drinking all the time. I'm stealing from anybody I can steal from. My drug of choice is whatever you got. And I just needed to get out of touch with reality. And at that point in the 90s, it was at the point where I was living on the street. I was bin diving for food. I remember on Kennedy Road and Lawrence area, just between Lawrence and Ellesmere, there was a Kentucky Fried Chicken. I remember going to that place, begging for food, and they wouldn't give me any in the store. So I went out behind, there was a bin, and I jumped into the bin, and there was mice and rats and everything else in there. And I'm just trying to scrounge for something to eat. And so anyway, at that point in time, through various means, I got in touch with someone who was looking for someone to work in the automotive paint system. And I went to that interview in Toronto and got the job and moved from Toronto to St. Thomas, where I worked from 1994. I started that job to 2010. And from a worker, I went up to become director of operations for the company in Canada. And had many automotive plants in Ontario and Quebec, and drinking alcoholically and working hard, but playing hard too. And all of a sudden things started to unravel. I had two more intimate relationships with two other women, which I call marriages. It was common law, but those both were destroyed and because of my drinking and my inability to really be in relationships. And then finally, in 2010, I had made decisions as a manager, which was not embezzling. It wasn't anything of that nature, but they were just bad business decisions that cost the company significant amount of dollars. And in August 3rd of 2010, I was terminated from that job. And I had just moved to Guelph maybe 8 months earlier. So now I'm in Guelph, and I get a phone call from my boss just saying, have you done this? And have you done this? And did you do this? And I said yes to it. And he just told me, get your stuff and get out, you're gone. And I didn't fight. And as I was walking out, I felt freer than I had ever felt. And my first phone call, my first phone call wasn't to a girlfriend, which I didn't have, wasn't to any family member who really, most of them weren't talking to me anymore. It was to the liquor delivery service in Guelph. And when the liquor delivery service that you call answers with, hi, Bob, how are you? You should think you have a problem with alcohol. I didn't. I just thought, hey, I'm the man. Yeah. And then they say, the same as yesterday. And I said, no, give me two. Right. And by the time I got from the plant to my home, which was about a 10-minute drive, the guy's in the parking lot with 2 bottles. I go up and I started my final journey with alcohol between August the 3rd and December the 4th. And it just went downhill with all the promises. December the 3rd, I went to bed that night, drunk. I didn't go to bed. I passed out into unconsciousness. And at that point, I'm not a big guy. I'm about 5'4". I usually weigh in about 150, 155 pounds. I was 80 pounds, and it's just like the ribs showing, the Biafran child on the posters, open sores all over my body. I could barely walk because of open sores. And all I lived for was to drink. That was it. I had drank away all the money I got in severances, and I ran EI to the end. I'm now probably on welfare, and that just wasn't enough to keep up my habit. And so this is the picture of this shiny shoed executive guy earning the big bucks that I thought I was, and now I'm this way. At that point, my nightly prayer was, God, don't let me wake up in the morning. And my morning prayer was, you bastard, I woke up, because now I had to go through another day. The abuse stuff, never on my mind. I had pushed that stuff down. I was good, and men are good at this, guys, and I've learned this even more, and we'll talk about the work we're doing with RSI. But I had pushed that sucker so far down, I forgot it even existed. And I had put so much alcohol on top of it that I realized that I was numb to it, and I couldn't feel anything. So by that time, there's a phrase that a mentor of mine has said, that if I would have died in 2010, they would have had to cremate me, because there were not 6 people on this planet that would have carried a casket. I had drank every person who cared for me away. There was not family members. My mother, my father had passed away. All of my brothers and sisters, they're just, that's it. We're done. And they gave a lot, man. They really, really tried. And I just, at a point, they just had to save themselves. And so anyway, at this December the 3rd, I get up after, about 2:00 in the morning. Now it's December the 4th. I got a sliver of some kind of brown liquid in the bottom of a bottle, and I got 1 cigarette. As an operations manager, we call this bad planning. And I decided, okay, I got to go to the store. So I get my park on and all this stuff, this 5'4", 80-pound Biafran child with ribs showing, who could barely walk, with open sores all over your body. And I start shuffling down to the variety store, all-night variety store, which is about 10-minute walk normally, which was about a half-hour walk for me the way I was. And when I was walking down there, I started thinking about, what kind of alcohol do I want today? What kind of delusional mind thinks this way? I still thought I had a handle on booze. With all of this stuff that's going on, I got nothing left. Nobody's calling me to see how I am, and nobody's taking my calls. But I still think, so maybe I'll have this. Maybe I'll have right. No, red wine might be the choice. This is the way this mind is thinking, guys. It is stupid. And as I'm going along, I started to think about when alcohol and drinking was fun. And in high school with the buddies, and you go out and you go to a dance and you have a couple of pops afterward, and you skip class in grade 13, you go to a local restaurant and you have fries and gravy and a beer, and it was just wonderful. And then you get into business, and I was very good in business and what I was doing. But unfortunately, you got to show up to be able to do it. But I was good at that. And I remember the good times in business, and you had to respect the people. And I got married, and we got a house, and we had 3 kids. And I had the dream, a government job, a beautiful wife, 3 beautiful children, and all I wanted to do was drink. And when my first wife, came to me and said, that's it. I know I'm flipping back here for a moment, but she said, I want a divorce. Mm-hmm. You know what I did? I turned on the tears, because alcoholics are good con guys. And I turned on the tears. No, dear, give me another chance. And she said, no, that's it. I walked into the kitchen out of the sight of my kids and my wife. And I went, yes, now nobody's going to get on my case about my drinking. Mm-hmm. Wow. And I'm thinking that thinking is normal. Yeah. So let me fast forward now to 2010. I get all ready. I'm walking down to the store. I'm thinking about booze, and I'm thinking about all this. And then all of a sudden, something happened. It was at just about 2:45 in the morning. And I started to see like a kaleidoscope, like we are here on Zoom, only if they could pan across the screen. And I saw the pictures of anybody who had been, who I'd loved in my life and who had made the mistake of loving a bum like me. And I saw the looks in their eyes, and I saw my mom, and I saw my dad, and I saw my brothers and sisters, and I saw my first wife, and I saw my 3 kids, and I saw my second wife and my third wife, and I saw my employers and my friends and all of the people I had let down. And in their eyes, there wasn't anger, there wasn't pity, there was just disgust. And I stood there for a moment. It kind of stopped me. And then I started thinking, and I turned and I said something to myself I had said thousands of times before. You're nothing but a friggin' drunk, only I didn't use friggin'. And I just turned. And I said what I now know is the alcoholic prayer. And I said, God, I'm a friggin' drunk. God help me. And I stood there. And if you've ever had your foot go to sleep and you get the pins and needles, I had that from the top of my head to the tips of my toes. And I know it was exactly at 2:46 in the morning of December the 4th of 2010, because the only thing I had of value, which I don't have with me right now, it's upstairs, was a watch. And not because it was expensive, because a very dear friend had given it to me. And I looked at that watch and it was 2:46 in the morning. And I stood there what seemed like for hours, and maybe it was 10 seconds. And I said, God, what am I going to do? And I walked to the store. I got smokes. I don't remember the walk home. I don't remember the rest of that weekend. It was an early Saturday morning. I woke up in the morning on Monday morning, and I realized I had just detoxed over the course, and the fact that I didn't die was amazing to me. And I went to this archaic computer that I had, and I typed in a couple of letters, which is very anonymous, if you know what I'm saying. It's a group of people that they have a problem drinking. If we had phone books, you'd find it very near the front of the phone book, as a hero of mine once said. And I called them, and there was a meeting that night, and I got ready, and I walked to that meeting. And again, December, crisp snow, clear sky. And I'm praying to God that I'll go to this meeting, because I've hit a point of desperation so deep. And I didn't have language for it. I'm saying this now. I was terrified. I was terrified in this moment. And I tried to remember the Hail Mary so I could walk and say it. And I couldn't remember the last half. So I said the Our Father all the way to this meeting. And when I hit the place where the meeting was, the sidewalk went straight, and I had to turn left to go into the meeting. And I wanted to go straight to drink. Guys, something came between me and booze. I did not have the power to not drink. That was evident by my history and where I had come to. All I wanted to do was die, and I couldn't even do that right. And my statement to myself then, because I had the knife out, I had the rope out, I had the balcony I could jump off. I could get the pills to take. Was, you are a failure in life, Bob. Failure in life. Failure as a father, failure as a husband, failure as a son, failure as a brother, uncle, fill them all out. And now you can't even kill yourself. You're a failure in death. What a waste of skin. And that is such a dark, deep place of hopelessness to be in. What a pit that is. And so I called, and I went into the meeting, and this guy greeted me, and these guys, this group just put a blanket of love around me, and they said, you're going to be okay. And I started dealing with people who understood me. And I'll fast forward it now. 3 years later, I'm in recovery. I got both feet in it, man, and I'm rocking and I'm rolling, and I'm working with alkies, and I'm working with drug addicts, and I'm going to treatment centers. I'm Mr. Recovery. I'm spiritual beyond a hilt, man, and I bought into a higher power. And you could have Bert and Ernie. I don't care who it is, but what I had isn't working. So let's go with the new one. And something just incredible happened. I started to enjoy life again. I started to be able to connect with people again. 3 years into recovery, almost to the day. I got sober December the 4th. On December 25th of 2013, I'm sitting, as I do now, in the morning and do my morning disciplines, which takes about 40 minutes of reading and some silent meditation. And at the end of that one, on Christmas Day of 2013, at the end of my discipline, I relived my sexual experience for the first time in 50 years that day. And it took about 2 hours. And I went through every aspect, every question in the car, every grooming hug, every kiss on the cheek, every pat on the bum, every aspect of the night in question. It took about 2 hours. And I just sat there, and it was like a dream, but you're awake. And at the end of that, I didn't go into trauma. I just said, my program in with these people who have a problem drinking, my program says I need to pray for this person. So I got on my knees in front of my couch and I started to pray for Father Robert. And after about a minute, I looked at my ceiling and I said, you know what, God, I'm not feeling the love. Just not feeling the love here, God. Gonna need some help with this. 4 days later, I had a call from Rob Talek of Beckett Personal Injury Lawyers, and they were taking a case against my priest to court. And did I want to be part of the thing? How this lawyer found me, knew about me. I'm a drunk, man. I just gotten sober 3 years ago. I never pay bills, let alone taxes. I have more numbers in 1 year than Carter's got pills. Right. How they found me, I have no idea. Right. And I said, yes, I will. And he sent me the documentation, and we started litigation against the Archdiocese in Toronto in 2013. The whole process, I'll be more than happy to go into and talk to you about of going through and preparing and mediation, deciding to go to trial and the effects of trial. And then we ended up winning the case in 2017. They appealed it. We then won the appeal, and we finalized the case in March of 2019. So it took 6 years from the time I started it, with a miracle, like where Rod Talek got my number and called me on this, I have no idea, and to go through. In the process of doing that, which is a whole thing we can go into and talk about with the experience of going to trial and sitting there and having a lawyer try to convince you at 11 years old you wanted to seduce a 45-year-old priest. And that whole concept of what's going on in the Catholic Church right now, we can go into and talk about. Through that process, I found there wasn't really a lot of supports for men who have been sexually abused. And I said, you know what I want to start if I get through this, and literally if I get through this, is start some kind of group like my friends who have drinking problems, but this will be about sexual abuse. The other thing I found was a lot of people who have addictions, alcoholics and addicts, have been sexually abused, probably 85%, if not more. And it's never talked about in these meetings. It's never talked about in the rooms. And so I try to get sober, but I don't deal with my trauma. It's a losing battle. I may get a couple of years in, but I am not going to be able to maintain a level of recovery and sobriety that is happy, joyous, and free. So I said, okay, so we want to see if we can start that. And then we want to see if we can pay for counseling for people who can't afford it. And then we'll start to do some other stuff. So I had this dream. And so when it ended, my wife and I started to talk about it. We agreed to put part of the money, and it's all public knowledge. You can Google me. I got just over $500,000. You guys are aware of that. And so we took a portion of that money and put it towards starting a group called the Recovery Speaking Initiative. And we called it this way because it's one survivor talking to another survivor, sharing their experience, strength, and hope. And I'm stealing that right out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, at the forward to the third chapter, the last sentence. And that's where lived experience, you need the trauma counselor, you need the clinical counseling, absolutely, 100%. But more and more, especially after COVID, we're finding that lived experience is as significant in recovery, if not more so, than clinical trauma counseling. And trauma counselors are telling me this. And mental health has come to the fore where it was always in the background. The stigma of mental health because of COVID is now coming front. So there's a positive side to that. So anyway, we started this little gig, and we started with a men's group, and we started up on Zoom and had a couple of guys from Southwestern Ontario. We ended up with 7, 8 guys from across Canada, and we go every Thursday night from 7 to 8:30, and we talk about whatever's on somebody's mind. You know, we do a check-in. How's everybody doing? We've had guys, and with our group, we've had 4 guys who have now settled their cases. And when I started working with them a year, 2 years, 3 years ago depending on the individual, they were a chocolate mess. It was impossible for them to really talk about their story. And they have come through now, and 4 of these gentlemen, 1 in BC and 3 in Ontario, have settled their cases and are still dealing with some of the trauma, but they have the tools of us just working together and working with counselors when the trauma comes up to deal with it. I got that tool belt on, and I got the right tool, whether it's meditation or grounding or mindfulness, or I have somebody on call that I can call Bob, or I can call another guy. And so we've been going now for about 2 years with the men's group, which is one aspect of Recovery Speaking Initiative. We have 4 pillars of Recovery Speaking. One is support groups. Another is education, where we educate the public at large about that. We can certainly talk about that and what we're doing with a couple of other groups. We also have the counseling, where we pay for counseling for those who need it if they can't afford it, and try to find them a counselor, which is very difficult to do today, given COVID and everything else. And then advocacy and representation, so that I deal with a lot of lawyers right now on behalf of them, because lawyers are great and they know what they're doing, but they don't know what it's like to be abused. So to prepare them for trial in particular, and to have a man take a story that he didn't, I wouldn't want to tell you 2 guys that. I'm not telling James and Patrick, man.
Yeah.
They're going to say he's weak and all this and yeah. And my pride isn't going to let me do that crap. I want to be able to fart and belch as well with you as you with me, right? And what I found is that's a lie. I'd been living a lie and believing a lie my entire life, and it almost killed me.
Right.
And so this is the kind of stuff that we try to get out. The last point on this, and then I'll take a breather, is in that group, how long ago now? Maybe a year, a little over a year ago now. I was Sunday night, I was watching 60 Minutes or whatever. I had an email. And when I checked it, there was a gentleman said from Recovery Speaking, it just says, "Bob, can you call me? I'd like to talk to you." And so I went up and I called him right away. And his name is Bob too. And we started talking back and forth. And this man was down in the dumps, man. He was in bad shape. Was he suicidal? I personally believe he was, whether or not he wanted to admit it at the time. So we talked long enough, and I got him to agree to talk to me again the next morning. And we talked the next day. The 3rd day of talking to this guy, you know what we found out? His abuser was the same as my abuser. He had the same abuser as I did 10 years later.
Holy.
So what had happened is it's gone for, like, this guy, this priest now had moved around to different parishes, and then in 1973 abused this gentleman in a parish in Toronto, when other like agencies like South Down and so on, which was a treatment facility for priests, said, "Fine, don't put him into any priestly duties, make him administrative." And he went to this, they put him in charge of the altar boys, and he sexually abused at least 1 at this parish. And that's a problem with the church. And we can talk about the institutional church, and I can talk, because I give them a fair shake, but that's something that can't go on. So we're starting to change lives, and we're starting to be able to, this man is just settled his case last week.
Right.
Just settled it. And the ease and calm that you can see in a guy. So yeah, the 2 worst things in my life, alcoholism and sexual abuse, somehow, some way, were turned around to be the 2 biggest assets in my life.
Sure.
And I'd like to say that I had the power to turn that around, but it wasn't. I don't know what's out there. I don't know what I believe. All I know is I didn't do this. My job is to suit up and show up, have some talk with you, have some laughs with you, and talk about a serious topic that may save a life tonight.
Well, Bob, your story is a very powerful one, an inspirational one, obviously, and one that I think all too often is one that we're hearing about and coming out later. Myself, I grew up in a Roman Catholic family as well as James. I served on the altar, still am a practicing Catholic today. And I noticed through your story that you refer back to kind of a higher power. What is your viewpoint now, if you don't mind, kind of? How has your faith pivoted over the years? Because that's where I feel when we have a lot of conversations and I talk with people about my faith. And they go,
Yep.
well, how could you? And that's one of the instruments of the Catholic Church right now. The problems with the church, or even just with a higher power, whatever, again, like you say, a lot of people are like, well, how could God let something like that happen? And I'm interested for someone like yourself of having this situation that unfortunately has happened to you that was totally inappropriate and nothing that you could have done. But how does that differentiate yourself from where you were in your faith?
Let me answer it this way, Patrick. The church for me prior to my abuse was that home. It was the safe building. You know this when you're altar boys and you would walk in there like a Wednesday morning in February when it was freezing and you had to walk to the church and you lit the candles and you got the curates ready. But somehow there was just this calming element. After the abuse, that was a house of horrors. I could not go back into the building. And that existed for me even at baptisms or with my children and stuff like this. It was never in a Catholic church again, but it was Anglican, or it was just unnerving. Just couldn't go back. And as far as my faith, I would always say I'm a very spiritual man, but I'm not religious. I lost my faith. I walked away from my faith.
Sure.
And what has happened in recovery for me is I have a program of recovery, which is a spiritual-based recovery program.
Right.
It's a 12-step program, which is well known.
Right.
It is not a religious program.
Right.
And to me, I separate those two things by religious being a man-made organization.
Sure.
Whether Catholic, Anglican, it's bricks and mortar, and a spiritual thing, which comes from my chi, my being, that essence of who I am and who Patrick is and who James is.
Sure.
And that's the difference between those two things. Do I believe there's a God right now? I'd say yes, I do. There is something out there, whether you call it God or not. I have tried to go back to church here in Guelph at our basilica, and I've tried 5 or 6 times, and I get about 15 minutes into the service, into the Eucharist, and I got to go.
Right.
And so while I'm working at it now, I still have a hard time. I want to come back to that home. I want to have that feeling. I don't know if I ever will. However, I've seen other men I'm working with right now who are able to reconnect into that service. So for me, yes, I honestly believe there is some kind of entity and there's some kind of existence after this existence.
Right.
But for me to just say, yeah, and I believe in the Catholic faith and go in and do the Nicene Creed and all that is just not for me right now.
Right.
I completely understand that, Bob. Like that makes total sense to me. Like for a priest, and I grew up in the Catholic Church. I understand how I viewed a priest, especially when I was a young man. Fortunately for me, and I didn't go through the same kind of experience you did, but you look at them on such a level that they're on a pillar and they're high above you. And I remember thinking, like, no matter what this man said, I would do. Like, if he told me to go run that way, I'd go run that way. Like, it didn't matter because he was so holy. And for someone of that you trust that much, and I've had people that I really trust in my life, not to that level, break that trust. And it's almost impossible to go back. So I understand that. Not as much as I don't understand what you went through. What I mean is I understand that whole idea of who the Catholic priest is when we were children. Thank you so much. I have to stop and say thank you so much for sharing this incredible story. Like the detail that you went into, you're absolutely right. Like even myself, I've come to terms with a lot of things that have happened in my life. I'm more open and honest, but it took a long time to be able to talk freely. And I still don't talk to a lot of people about thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And I haven't gone through what you've gone through. I'm talking about small things. So I think it's incredible that not only can you share that story with other survivors, but to come on here and share it with us and the people out there, not only is that impressive and brave and wonderful, I know that people hearing this, especially men, will go, you know what? He told his story and it's still okay. It's still all right. It's still, and that's what I'm learning, that, you know, like, you're right. We had this concept, especially, like, I'm an older man too, that if you share your feelings, men will look down upon you. They will think less of you the moment you share it. Like, you can't, you know, I'm not feeling well together. I'm not even like I'm sad. You don't share any of that.
Yeah.
It's, you know, you make a joke, you crack a joke. So thank you for all that. Thank you for bringing this on. So what I'm interested in is, how do these men find you? Like, I know that you have the website and all that stuff, but like you explained, and you vividly explained, and I could see it, you walking towards that AA meeting, and you could see that pathway to the alcohol and then the door to your right. I imagine everyone who comes to your website or to you or picks up the phone to call you doing the same thing.
Speaking
of, I'm going to tell the story or not tell the story, you know? So when they share their experience with you, why do you think they're able to do it? I guess is what I'm saying.
I honestly believe that everybody will hit a point of desperation.
Right.
And if you're alcoholic, you'll hit like that point that I hit, that I explained to you. And I call that the gift of desperation. There's God for you. Gift of desperation. And I think that at a certain point in a man's life, if he's been abused, it's going to have to be dealt with to some degree. It just can't be pushed down anymore. And whether that's when they're in their 30s or their 50s or their 70s, me in the 60s, if I'm going to leave this existence in a sense of fullness and a fullness of spirit, I'm going to have to deal with this in some capacity. And everybody's story and everybody's journey is different. So I think this kind of thing, I do this not because I'm such a nice guy. I'm doing this, one, because I believe in Recovery Speaking Initiative. But this also helps me with my trauma.
Right.
As when I work with an alcoholic, that helps me when times are going bad. And I'm going through some stuff right now, which is really crappy stuff.
Right.
And instead of whining and complaining about it or going down to the bar and sitting between you two guys telling you how sad my whole life is so you'll buy me a drink, and you guys taking off to another bar, I actually give thanks for the pain I go through now, because my experience has been, and I had a very, very negative personal experience happen about 3 weeks ago, guys. That is a life-changing experience. Right. And when I looked at that, I was broken. I called a couple of guys, and a guy helped me out that night on a Zoom call. And I'm not ashamed to say I was like a broken spirit that night. And I did a lot of meditation. And what came to me in my meditation is, Bobby, you had 2 other times that you felt like this. One was about the sexual abuse and one was about the booze. And how did you get through that? How'd you walk through that gateway, that arch? And what I said was, I had to do 3 things. I had to surrender to this. I just had to, I'm not going to fight you anymore. I was abused, whatever. 2, I had to forgive anybody who was involved in that. If that was Father Alphonse Robert, in the other case, it was somebody more personal to me. And the final one is, I had to accept. So I had forgiveness, surrender, and acceptance. And I did that. And I got through that personal trauma. The pain's still there, but I got through it. Yeah. And I can deal and function every day and come on your show and be almost logical and talk about this stuff, even though inside there's a ton of pain going on, as we all go through in life. Welcome to life struggles, you know? Right. And I think that's what men see, the sincerity, and they see the passion. And the biggest thing that was stolen from me by Father Alphonse Robert and in some ways the Catholic Church was after the priest raped me and sexually abused me. I was unable to trust anybody else in my life.
Right.
How could I didn't trust my mom. I didn't realize that till I started my stuff on the trial. How could I trust a woman who let me go? She was supposed to protect me, my little Bobby, and I had no business getting married. I didn't know how to be in a relationship. I thought I did now, but sometimes I wonder. And it's
Yeah.
but I couldn't trust. It was getting sober from booze and starting through the 12 steps, being able to believe in something outside of myself and starting to believe and trust you guys. And you guys came back with similar stories. And all of a sudden I'm trusting one person and two people. And then I move on from that. And I think that men who are coming in and will reach out, they may watch a video that I've done on CBC or something else 4, 5, 6 times and then make the call. And maybe they tried 4 or 5 times and then they finally do. And we meet, or else I don't hear from them again.
Right.
And then a year goes by and all of a sudden they call me again. Right. And the journey will be when the journey's ready, and we'll just be ready and hopefully have the stuff. The other thing that was significant, that if people are listening here, you know what else 12 step allowed me to do? Go to the gravesite of my abuser, Father Alphonse Robert, in St. Xavier Cemetery in Tilbury, Ontario, with my AA sponsor. And I read to him an 8-page letter to Father Robert at his gravesite, an 8-page letter of forgiveness. And then I read a 4-page letter of an amend because I had maligned his character my entire life. And going into that
Sorry. The last part there, you broke up a bit for me.
Yeah, I did read a 4-page letter of an amend, where I was making amends to him because I had maligned his character throughout my lifetime.
How I don't understand that. Explain that to me. How would you, as someone who was victimized by this individual, have maligned his character?
If I have forgiven, okay, let me answer that this way. I was a bad drunk. I traumatized my 3 kids. I just stopped going to see them. I lived 45 minutes away. Right. I traumatized my wife by, she had no security where the light's going to be on, was a mortgage paid, who's going to knock at the door. And all of these people forgave me when I got sober.
Okay.
So as the Our Father says, forgive me my trespasses as I forgive those who have trespassed against me. Right. That was the reason for the forgiveness letter. Yeah. But then my actions, if this man, like I was spiritually sick when I was drinking, and spiritually sick people do spiritually sick stuff. And this man was spiritually sick. So when I looked at those 2 traumas that early morning when I was struggling with this very question, Patrick, and I looked at the trauma I caused on my children, of a son of 7 years old who says, why isn't daddy coming anymore? Doesn't he love me? And it just vanishes. And the trauma he has experienced, and my trauma, is mine worse because it's sexual? No. So, and that son had forgiven me. So who am I not to forgive my abuser? And if he was spiritually sick like me, chances may be that he didn't want to abuse kids. And I'm not condoning what he did, please. Mm-hmm. But for my recovery, I had to set the scales right. I had to get the balance of the scales that I did you wrong. So I am saying I make amends for that. And I will not malign his character again with the help of a God that I certainly don't understand for the rest of my life.
Right.
And that's because I want to live a good spiritual life. And that was for me, more so for him. Because that frees me. Now I own my story. He doesn't own me.
Right.
He doesn't live up here. And that was a vehicle to that. That's why I would do it. Trust me, I still wanted to dig him up and horsewhip the son of a bitch. But
yeah. So we did a whole little thing. We talked to a psychologist and we talked about forgiveness. And we talked about, how it's wonderful if you can talk to the other person and they say, I'm so sorry, everything. But that doesn't happen very often. And what happens is exactly what you're saying. That person now gets to live rent free in your head forever because you can't let it go. It's not like the way I understand what you're saying is you're making amends for like the part you played in afterwards, not during, so that you can heal. Has nothing to do with him. You're not trying to make him feel better. You're trying to make you feel better. You're trying to let go of that part that has lived rent free in your head, even without you knowing, for 60 years.
Yeah.
And so we had a whole conversation about how important that is to heal, because you may, and you won't, unfortunately, get that apology, that sorry, but you can let it go, because you holding on to that hate won't help you ever.
No, it's an absolute acid living in our systems.
Yeah.
And sexual abuse affects you at a cellular level like nothing else I have ever experienced. And COVID isn't far off that. COVID and the COVID virus, if you look into it, it goes into every aspect of our body because it's carried with the blood, right? And it goes into our minds and everything else. And sexual abuse is almost like that, but I don't know it. I don't know how much of an a-hole I'm being when I think this is normal. And I don't know how to be in a relationship, and I'm a runner, and things go bad. It's like, okay, I'm going for milk and I never see you again.
Sure.
And that's what I did. And so try to sit in a room with 5 or 6 guys that have been abused and saying, what you have to do is forgive your abuser. You're lucky to get out of that baby alive. But once you get talking and they see what happened, and now the men are seeing it because they have in their own ways forgiven their abusers at different levels. And there's sorry, go ahead, Patrick.
Well, so my questions, so I have so many questions, and obviously this is something that, this is 60 years of a story. Well, it's 70 years of a story. But, all of the things that we want to bring up and talk about, we could sit here forever. One of the big things is obviously, as a Catholic, I look at this and I look at, the church and the role of the church in allowing this potentially to occur, and then occurred again and again and again. So I would like to understand your understanding of that and what you saw, because again, my experience through the church is very different, very similar to, I think, James, and that I had immensely very positive experiences, and that were fantastic. I had great relationships with priests. I had, my family going back in history. We had, the bishops sitting out and having a drink on my grandfather's porch, small community, right? And that was what I grew up in. On the counter is that,
but at the same time, not knowing, like when we were younger, we didn't know, like I didn't know that they were moving priests around. Like when I found that out, that they were moving sexual predators around from place to place after willingly knowing that it was
that's what
was a fracture of faith.
That's what I'm trying to find out, James, from somebody who's actually been in that,
right?
In regards to what Father Alphonse, is it Father Robert or Father Alphonse?
Father Robert, yeah. His first name was Alphonse, yeah.
Alphonse Robert, Father Robert. Did he remain a priest until he died?
Yep.
See, like, to me, those are problems.
That's a huge problem.
That's a huge problem, right?
Yes.
So again, Bob, I'm going to kind of leave this up to you. And if you don't mind, kind of what your viewpoint of the situation through the church a little bit would be great.
And I'm really glad you asked that question, Patrick, because there is some work that I'm doing through RSI with a couple of the survivors from the men's group right now, actually. Right. But my view of the church right now is there's a lot of lip flapping, but their feet aren't pointed where their voices are aimed.
Right.
And they will apologize. And I think Pope Francis is really trying to do something significant. But there are people, Marie Collins out of Ireland, who is, you're familiar with her. She sat on a committee requested by Pope Francis that she sit on this committee, and she did for 3-4 years. And she left it because he would say, I want to do this. Then the cardinals at the next level said, nah, we're not going to do that. Just kind of leave that. So nothing ever really changed. And the church as an institution really has working from the top down isn't working, as evidenced by the fact of what we're seeing and the way they're approaching this. And the number of abuse cases coming up is reduced now. It is less. What's the reason? Hard to say. Are they getting more efficient with it? There's not a lot of priests coming out either. And most of the stories you're starting to hear now are historical cases of childhood sexual abuse. So I'm hoping that it's right. In the recent Catholic conference, they came out with a document that is a pretty good document. I was on CBC on The Current with Anna Maria Tremonti discussing that when it came out, actually. And it was great for The Current, but they're not talking past. They're not taking responsibility and accountability and transparency. And
now,
so
do you think that's a liability issue, just first and foremost, that they're concerned about monetary rewards,
money.
that sort of thing? Do you think that's
all about the money?
Okay.
And if you settle, they have a non-disclosure that you go by, where normally it's just on the money, the amount of money they gave. But they say on the agreement, we are not admitting to any fault or blame in this case. And I'm paraphrasing that. But the fact is, you can't come back and say you've admitted it. Now the gentleman who just settled his case was the guy who was abused 10 years after me. He didn't have to go to trial because I went to trial and set the groundwork for this. He was able to benefit from that and not have to go through the trial experience, which thank God for that. And that's a wonderful feeling too. But I think the church, we just started doing something, Patrick, which was really phenomenal. About 8 months ago, I started working with a group called Concerned Lay Catholics, which you may or may not have heard of. No. And it's a group of Catholics from across Canada. It's a national group, which are upset with the church on how they're handling the sexual abuse cases in the church. Okay. And so my charity started to hook up with Catherine and Brenda from the chapter locally here in Hamilton and St. Catharines. And we held 3 sessions with parishioners and with survivors, starting to have conversations between the parishioners and the survivors families on the impact. And we were actually invited to Our Lady of Lourdes, St. Vincent de Paul Parish in Niagara-on-the-Lake, about 2 weeks ago. And we had a session, myself and another survivor and CLC, with what we thought would be about 10 parishioners, and there ended up being 40 or 50 of them there. And we had an incredible discussion that the parishes and the parishioners, the people in the pews, are hurting as much. Maybe it's not as much as the survivors themselves, but they are hurting. This thing doesn't know boundaries. And this parish had a priest who was an abuser, and they didn't know how to resolve this. And so we're working that maybe we could start working with parishioners and have some healing within the church, and then have the parishioners put pressure on the priests and the bishops and the cardinals. So the change comes from the top and the bottom at the grassroots. Right. But the only way, you got to follow the money. You got to follow the money. We got to really take a look. And this is where we're going in our advocacy. Look at the church and the tax breaks they get from our governments on their property taxes and everything else. And unless they're going to open their files, and every diocese has these files that they don't want to open up. And you got to open up. We want transparency. Because if they were transparent, they're afraid that they will go bankrupt because of the cost of it. And that's why nobody said that to me. That's what I believe it is. But until such time as we allow the church we need to come out of this with some kind of dignity on all sides.
Right.
The church is not going to acquiesce to, and I love SNAP. I love the people in SNAP. But I don't, what they're doing and what they have been doing doesn't seem to be really affecting a change on a large degree and challenging the upper echelons of the church. And they're beautiful people in there, and they're dedicated to it. And what I want to do is try to come at it from a different perspective, almost at a perspective where I want to sit at a table and say, okay, how can we solve this? I'd love to sit at a big negotiation table with a couple of cardinals and Pope Francis and say, okay, how can you guys come out of this with faith, and how can it be just for the survivors?
So, Bob, I think you bring something up that's a beautiful thing there. You bring up the saving face for everyone. So you yourself as a victim, somebody that's been here, you speak, the Bob McCabe truth in your story. And when you have your panel of men that you've brought along there that have their own stories, do you think there is hope that one day that is an option, or do you think that there are so many people that are just done? There is nothing more. We don't want anything more. It is what it is.
My honest belief, Patrick, is if the church is going to exist, it will have to change. It will not be in my lifetime. It will, as the new priests come on. I was just invited to join, at least take a look at joining the teaching group at St. Augustine Seminary, in order that I can go in and talk to seminarians about the impact of this. So if we can change the culture at that root in 100 years from now, maybe it'll be less and there will be more.
Now, so with that being said, so I think that's a very interesting, to me, that's what the struggle is it's an education. And I'm not going to go back in history, and I don't know Father Robert, but there's probably something there too for him, right? Like historically, when we look at abuse, so to get in there and educate around the trauma that this leaves for victims for the rest of their lives, and that the position of power and authority the priests are. And do you think that the church is doing enough in that effort to continue in education or to push those types of programs?
They're talking about it. I haven't seen the action that I could answer that in the affirmative. I think they're talking a good game, but they're not walking a good game. And until they start to walk it at the parish level, and each archdiocese not laying off blame and hiding behind their lawyers. Stop hiding behind your lawyers. They are your agent. Don't tell me, well, the lawyer has it, we can't talk. That is not true. You don't have to appeal many cases. And that's another fallacy that is important to say here. As a survivor, I don't blame the church that Father Robert abused me. I don't. No. I blame the church for how they handled Father Robert afterwards. So let's, as survivors, lay the blame where it needs to lay, not just at the church as an institution. It's too big, and you're not going to get anywhere. Yeah. So I allow the church, and the church has a right to take this to court and to put me on the stand and to do what they do in the legal process. It's not nice. It's not comfortable. But look at it. Why did you have to appeal it? You didn't have to appeal my case, Archdiocese of Toronto, but they left it to their lawyers, and the lawyers have an open checkbook. Follow the money.
Right.
And so deal with it honorably.
So your viewpoint, Bob, is the fact that I struggle with calling him Father Robert, to be honest with you. Like to me, that is a real problem. So Alphonse, what he did to you, your problem, and I appreciate your viewpoint on that, is that it wasn't the Catholic Church, that the institution in and of itself victimized you. It wasn't until afterwards where you get to an appeal process 50 years later, and that's where you really feel victimized. And this is something that I bring up with family members of my own, and they go, I really struggle with going to church with all of the news that's going on right now. And that's
I think it's the after effects. I think it's the fact that instead of what they should have done is said, oh my God, Albert sexually abused children in this diocese. We are going to deal with that. We're going to take him to court. He's going to be criminally processed until proven innocent or guilty, But instead, they went, oh no, you did this. We're going to move you somewhere else. And then 10 years later, a gentleman that Bob knows was sexually assaulted. And that is where the church is at fault. I love the Catholic Church. I'm a big fan of the Catholic Church. I think they do wonderful things. But I still can't come to terms with the fact that church moved around sexual predators when they knew what was happening. Like that just boggles my mind. And I think
another wild thing, like especially in my case, because I was victim number one, if you will, for Father Robert at St. Lawrence, because he had just been ordained.
Right.
Okay.
I never said anything. And, I run not deeply, but it comes to my mind. If I would have said something and if he would have been caught, then that other Bob wouldn't have been abused.
You almost
And
have
there's
like
a
survivors.
yeah, and it's
Yeah.
kind of a survivor's guilt, if you will. And you know, I've talked to the gentleman about it, and we just say, yeah, but we can't. Who's going to believe us? And the fear of not being believed, and so on was greater. But you know, it just is something which is
Yeah,
so deep.
you guys were kids. You know,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, coming from the power, the institution that is the church, the authority that comes with being a priest, the victimhood is so much different than it is a hockey coach or something like that. Now,
Well, yeah.
both
You know, I think it's a person in position of power, though, Patrick. And
yeah, but do you think, okay, so with that being said, so
Yeah.
I agree with that. Power is power in a lot of ways, but there's a divinity.
there is, yes, I agree
Right.
with you.
So
Yeah.
my issue is, and I bring this up with people all the time, is that there's bad hockey coaches, there's bad, brownies leaders, there's bad Boy Scouts leaders, there's all of these things, but there is something uniquely divine about the priestly situation.
Yep.
And it hits differently, I think.
Yeah, because you not only took my very soul and everything I trusted, but you took God away from me too.
Right.
Yeah. And I did not find God again until I went into the rooms of 12-step recovery. And I use God now, I think because I'm lazy more than anything else. But I don't know. I honestly don't know if I believe in God. And how bad is that or how good is that? I don't know. But I know there's something. You know, I'm sitting here and I'm looking out and I see the stars in the universe. You know, I can't create that. You know, so there is some power greater. And is there reincarnation and all that? I don't know. But
sure,
you know, we'll find out if there's an existence after this. But too many coincidences have occurred in my life since I entered recovery in 2010 that now I just go, whoa, that's amazing. Like miracles around me every day that now I'm awake to that probably were happening. I had the privilege of spending some time with Mother Teresa. And I didn't want to go to the main talk because I had a chance to go drink beer with a buddy. You know, what kind of guy is that? You know?
Oh, wow.
Sorry, Mother. I'll catch you later, Mother. You know, you and the Calcutta ladies. You have a good time. You know?
I love that.
Oh,
that's great.
No, I agree with you. Like, there's been many moments, not as prolific as what you went through, but there's been many moments in my life where the unexplainable series of events have occurred to allow me to move forward, to allow me to get something, to allow me to not be in the dark place I'm in. That it just doesn't make sense that someone at some point, at that moment, that point of impact, didn't reach out and go, James, no, we're going to save you. This is the direction you need to go. Not only are we going to save you, we're going to use your voice to help others. And Bob, I think that's what's happening. I think that, like, that's my firm belief. The story that I've heard you tell, and you know, it's your story, so I'm just kind of paraphrasing. I really do agree with you. I think miracles happen, and I think when people ask me, like Pat said, how does God, your God, Catholic God, whatever God you believe in, allow tragedy to happen? Now, I'm a personal belief that God doesn't allow tragedy to happen. Tragedy happens because we have free will. But I also believe that when tragedy happens, he gives you those tools that you talk about, those skills, those things that if you want to do the work, he will help you, raise you up so you can create something as beautiful as Recovery Speaking. Not only Recovery Speaking, but you're working hard in the church to a church that turned its back on you. Like that you said in court. Like, it boggled my mind that you just said a short little statement. I was like, it's still throwing me a little bit. A priest lawyer for the Catholic Church said to you that you seduced a priest at 11 years old or 10 years old.
They're too smart to say that directly, but it was the implication of the questions they were being, you know, what were you doing? What were you wearing? You know,
right.
Yeah.
So and yet you still have the the strength of character and to go back into that situation and go, you know what? I think I can heal that church. I think I can make it better. And I just think that's a beautiful thing. And, you know, to me, that is the tragedies that I see in the world. Some of the greatest, most horrific tragedies have brought the most beauty, have grown the greatest flowers. And I think in this case, it's true. You're helping the church. You're helping men be able to speak that can't speak. Like I think it's changing now. Like that is one of the questions. I know I'm bouncing all over the place, but there's so much in this topic that I'm not sure how to deal with it myself. But so you talk a lot about older men coming to you.
Yep.
Are you having younger men come to you? Like maybe having nothing to do with the Catholic Church, but young men get sexually abused by other people. Are you having
they
them?
are.
And do they have an easier time? Because I know my kids, although they still have that little bit of stigma because there's still that kind of manliness, not as strong as I remember when I was a kid.
Yep.
Are you finding that they have an easier flow, or what do you think is the difference there?
What I'm finding right now is they come and then they leave and then they come back again. And
Right.
the rage is much more prominent.
Really?
Than what I've seen in survivors coming out at 50 or 60 years of age. There's more of a life experience, maybe a lived experience, where I can look at an emotional situation and not react. Although, you know, in my case too, there's a lot of trauma counseling that had gone on.
Right.
So, yeah, I have a couple of guys I'm working with in their 30s right now. I have a gentleman who I was in touch with yesterday in his 20s.
Wow.
Who was abused by a family member who's now coming out. And that's a tough one. How do you deal with that? And I have somebody in our men's group who was abused by by a family member. So we kind of have him working with them. So its identification is big. And the biggest thing with any of these guys is you got to give a thread of hope, man. You got to have a lifeline thrown into the water there to say, yeah, you're going to go through 6 years of hell here. And you're going to have the nightmares and the night terrors, and you're not going to be able to sleep, and you won't be able to eat, and you're just going to blow up. You're going to have rages, and your family won't know what to do with you. But we'll continue to walk with you now. And we'll sit in the courtrooms with you, and we'll go to the mediations with you. And it'll be okay. And you know what happens is very quickly, within 6-7 months, the man starts to own his story.
Right.
To varying degrees. And there's the twist that you need, that the story doesn't own me anymore. I own the story.
Right.
And it goes from just breaking down like a 6-year-old in a pink party dress, wailing and crying on your own because I can't show it to you, pulling off on the side of the road when I'm thinking about this stuff, to it becomes a sadness rather than a trauma. That's my experience. And I think it's Korean. There's a word in Korean called han. And it just means feeling a sadness so deep you can't even cry. And that'll be with me to the day I die. Right. But it doesn't have to own me to the day I die. I can own it. And if we can pass that message of hope that you too can get through this with all the other great guys that are working in this field, you know, Tom Wilkin in Chatham is doing some amazing work and has done some amazing work in putting out a book called The Rebuilding of Your House of Self-Respect. And I have so much respect for him and the work he's doing, that we're going to get there. The voices are getting louder. And they're going to get louder in the next generation and the next. And my hope is that these guys that I'm working with now will continue to carry the torch when I'm either no longer here or not able to proceed in this capacity.
Now, so Bob, one of those things that you talked about at the very beginning there was, you know, this very early in the phone book organization. And I don't know why you put it that way, but so AA, obviously one of the things that they talk about.
Yep.
So the 12 steps, having a higher power. Do you see a correlation between, you know, in your work here, do you see a correlation between substance abuse and sexual violence?
Absolutely.
Do you find that sometimes they're very synonymous, or is it that one comes with the other one, or is it that, what is your findings?
most men have some, if they were sexually abused, have some kind of addiction, whether it's drugs, booze, gambling, sex, whatever the case may be. But we have to go outside of ourselves. We need something external to fix something internal. I'm feeling dis-ease inside me. And for me, it was whatever alcohol I could get. It was scotch. I didn't get into heavy drugs. I didn't do coke and heroin and all that kind of stuff. But I did, kind of the pot and the hash and alcohol, anything that would take me away from here.
Right.
And would stop the incessant chatter of 1,000 monkeys. I have a couple of guys that I work with now who are not alcoholic, became hard drinkers. And you would think they were alcoholic, but they were relying on something externally to try to find some ease and comfort internally. And this one guy I was talking to today, and a great chap from Montreal, his thing was workaholic. He worked so hard and he would go at it, and he became the real man, and all that stuff. And then he broke in his late 40s. Right. And his abuser was a scout leader. And now we're able to come together and look at these things. But the reliance on something else, I would say 80%, right? They say 1 in 6 men have been sexually abused now. Wow. That's a Canadian statistic. And that's underreported because there's a lot of men who don't say anything. And that's probably more like 1 in 4. Right. Have been sexually abused and don't ever come out. And a good friend of mine, I was doing some work with another group back a couple of years ago, and a woman who was an executive director for this group, she ended up marrying a guy that I went to high school with. And we got talking back and forth and joking, and I said, whatever happened to him? And he ended up committing suicide because he then came out right at the end and said he had been sexually abused by a priest. I went to school with this guy and I never knew it. Wow. Because we just don't talk about it. I want to do work in the universities. I want to go to high schools and say, real men do talk about this, guys. Right. And real men do have these conversations, because that's the only way we're going to stop the gun going into the mouth and blowing their brains out, because you just can't take it anymore. And our culture is changing too. I think, as you said, James, I think our culture is definitely changing. That is allowing, and COVID has done this too, allowing men to not ride the stigma and the guilt and shame bus all the way to the dump anymore.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree. More when men come out and speak more often now, they're not made fun of, and they're not shunned. They're bolstered up, and they're appreciated for what they're saying. Whereas before, like those kind of stories, people would make, like especially if you're a group with men, someone would make a joke about it. They would totally just laugh it off, make a joke, and then you move on to something else, like it wasn't important. Like the story it wasn't important, right?
If I can there, because I've never experienced that, and maybe it's. So I'm 36 years old, Bob. I'm much younger than James, and I joke about it all the time.
Much better looking too, eh?
Thank you. I appreciate that. I like this guy.
Well, all the time we have tonight. Thank you very much, Bob. I really appreciate you.
So at 36 years old, and again, maybe being of that younger generation, I'm kind of split between James and his kids, right? Yep. So I couldn't even imagine sitting down and hearing your story and a bunch of guys cracking up and hitting each other and being like, man. I couldn't imagine that. Now, I look at my father in that generation, and I think they would have probably pushed back about the church. Like if we were having this conversation right now, my father recently passed away, and he, his thing would be like, well, about the church. I think questions would come about the church. Mm-hmm. I don't know how, as a community, as a society, as a human being, you could sit there and attack a victim, a person that has went through this, being their story. And to me, that's just inhumane. But it seems like is that a real thing, or is that a personification of what the world is viewing for victims?
So I'm not saying that when you I'm not saying that if he was I'm sorry, Bob, I don't mean to take, I'm sure you live this and you know it better than I do. What I'm trying to say is that I don't think he would have got his full story out. I think because it would become uncomfortable and the jokes would come out. I don't know what your experience is, Bob. What do you think?
I think that my experience has been I haven't experienced any of what my fears were.
Right. Yeah.
And there may be stuff behind the back. There may be stuff that's being said. And that's where 12-step of recovery gave me the ability to live inside out rather than outside in. So I don't care what you guys think of me.
Right.
I know my reality and my truth. Whereas before, I would have had to impress you. I would have been here in what would have looked like a $2,000 suit, but I couldn't afford the pants, so don't go down low. And I had to have the right golf clubs and the right car, and I had to live just right. And who said it? It's not the, oh gosh, I wish I could, but it fundamentally, I've lived a lie my whole life, and I believed it, not my whole life, but up until I was 60, and I believed it to be true. And it's the lies that I believe that are true that will kill me, that a priest is next to God, that real men don't talk about this. If I tell Patrick and James about this, they're going to laugh at me. They'll look at me differently. Yep. I don't think it was real. I think it was a delusion, but it came from a place of fear. 100%. And I don't trust people because of that. Running up that driveway as an 11-year-old boy, I never trusted another person again until the lawyer of my case said to me in my apartment in Guelph, 3 years into prep, do you trust me? And I said, yeah, of course I do. And he says, you're full of shit. You don't trust anybody. And then we started talking about it, and I realized it. And that was when I realized I never trusted my mother. And I always had this conflict, like, I don't like my mom. I don't know what this is. This is bad, Bob. Everybody should love their mom. Right. And I didn't. I loved my mom. I didn't mean that. But there was a strain between us. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know what it was. I had to go back to her grave and do an amend. Mm-hmm. And hopefully there is an existence where I can see her on the other side and in spirit, kind of have a chat about that, because I lost a lot of time with my parents and my family, and it's strained even today because of behaviors that I exhibited then. And this is where it ripples out. And intergenerational trauma, my children, and I'm trying to ease that so that my grandchildren have an easier intergenerational experience than my children did and that I had. So it's a tough go, but hope is there, and you can come through it. And if anybody's listening to this right now, and if they've held in for 127 minutes or an hour and 27 minutes, there is hope. There is hope. Just have your truth and reach out and talk to somebody, or get in touch with me at Recovery Speaking, and we can certainly see if there's something we can do. I'm working with a gentleman right now in Guelph here, and I'm not going to give anything away, but this man was sexually abused. He's in his early 60s, and he was sexually abused 55 years ago. And that priest actually pimped him out to rich people from Toronto and Oakville for a number of years. And how incredulous is this? And the horror stories that I'm hearing that just are being, pushed aside. And this man's, I don't know if we'll ever be able to get him on a plane where he's got some ease and comfort, but, maybe we can help out a little way. But there's some pretty devastating stories out there.
Well, Bob, I don't know how to go from here.
Yeah. Well, I was going to pull up the website because we haven't done that yet.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We should pull up the website. So, Bob, I think what you're doing is amazing. This is it, Recovery Speaking Initiative. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it as we show here what's going on?
Yeah, Recovery Speaking Initiative is there to provide whatever it is we need to provide to ease the person into starting their journey into recovery from sexual abuse and trauma. Trauma as a whole is what we're after, by persons in positions of power. That could be teachers, it could be coaches, it could be military, it could be a boss, it could be a babysitter or an older sibling. So we are here, and we have a men's group, as I said, that goes every Thursday night. All they have to do is get in touch with me at info@recoveryspeaking.org, and we will definitely get back to you. I will get back to you and have a chat, and you can come out and join us with the men's group. We are also starting to run some educational programs where, with the people in the pews, the parishioners, where we're educating the public. We just had a presentation of the documentary Pray, which was about Rod McLeod, and I believe the largest award in Canada, 2.5 million he received on his case back a few years ago. And an incredible documentary called Pray, Prey, is out there by Matt Gallagher. So we had that. We had the community out, and we talked about sexual abuse in the church and views on it, and being able to come out and talk. And I've been at many AA talks, and I've been the speaker at many talks, and I always include it. I don't go into detail. I just say I was abused, because that is part of my story, and it connects with the alcohol. And there has not been any time, to my recollection, when I've done a talk and mentioned it, that I have not had a man come up and say, "Me too."
Wow.
And it's the same as Theo Fleury has had when he tells a story about writing his book and doing the signings. And there was a guy at the back coming up, and a man who was just terrified to say anything, and laid his book down and said, "Me too," to Theo Fleury. And the great work that Theo's doing with men in this field is incredible. So my kudos to Theo on this. So they're out there, one in 6 men, and they just don't talk about it. So we're just doing it, putting ourselves out there, and seeing what we can do to save a life or two.
I think it's amazing work. So just to reiterate, because I think the most important thing is contacting you. So if I'm a gentleman, so the other question, what if it's a lady? Like, I know there's other support groups out there for women.
Certainly, we hope at some point we're going to be able to get a female or woman's support group going, but that's going to have to be run by a woman. And at this point, I have not met a woman who would carry the message for Recovery Speaking at this time. There's a couple that I'm chatting with, but that is something hopefully in 2023 we'll be able to expand into as well.
So for now, it's men, and so you go to the website, contact us, which Pat's put up here. Type your name in, and then a message you're looking for. What kind of message would you think that you would?
If they just say, "Hey, I would like to talk to you," and they give me their number or their email address, then I would respond to them. And if they fill this out, that comes directly to me. It comes to my tech advisor as well as our treasurer. So if I miss it, one of them will see it and get it to me, and I will personally reach out to them.
That's beautiful. Okay, well, I think, Bob, I don't know, man. I wasn't sure what when I was introduced to you, like all of this, like we've never met in person. All of this has been, up until this moment, has been through email. I knew brief little parts of your story, but your inspiration, and I think what you are doing now is incredible to go through what you've done and turn it into something so beautiful, helping you know, like the way I always feel about it is if I can help one person, that's enough for me. Right. And you're helping probably hundreds of people. And I encourage you to keep going, because you're changing the world, man. And I think that's so beautiful. Pat?
Well, yeah, Bob, like James was saying, is that what you're doing here is pretty profound stuff. And I say this, and I believe you understand the meaning of this, but you're doing God's work in what you're doing there.
Honestly believe that.
And God bless you for doing that. That it's incredibly powerful, and you're giving a voice to people that otherwise don't have. And you're shining a light that in a very dark room that people can focus on, and it's not a train. So that's a pretty profound thing. So, Bob, I think we should wrap up here. I want to thank you for coming on here. I noticed a couple times I'm a pretty good observer of my buddy James, and there were some times there where he was pretty choked up, and this was a story that was pretty profound for him. So I want to thank you for coming on. Hopefully there's some people out there that get something from this, and we have some people that contact you. But what we do at the end of these and a little less formal than some of the stuff here, is at the end of this, we tend to stick our lives on Thursday with a little slogan at the end. I have my slogan, James got his slogan, and we kind of stick you with some words of wisdom. I don't think you'll probably have trouble with that at the end of this. But for me, Bob, thank you. I appreciate it. You're an inspiration, and I wish you nothing but the best, my friend. It's been a pleasure meeting you. And for all the profiteers out there, thank you for joining us, and let's make some money together, guys. James.
Bob, you're an inspiration, and like Pat said, and I hope it's not hurtful, you are doing God's work. I think it's a beautiful thing, and I really truly believe that he touched you in those moments that you speak about, to turn your life around, to turn it into such a beautiful thing. And maybe you'll be the start of healing his church. I don't know, but you definitely are going about it the right way, and I think you're a beautiful man. And to hear you even once say that you're unworthy or worthless, drunk, or I can't even remember how you put it.
A bum like me. Yeah.
That ain't true, buddy. That ain't true. You are I could swear you're a fucking beautiful guy. I think you are both encouraging and wonderful listening to you speak. And you know what? I think anyone who came to you just feels how much passion and how much drive and how much love you have for another person. And I just can't see them not being helped by you. And I think you're doing God's work. I don't know how to say it better than he said it. And profiteers out there, thank you for joining us. I hope you got something out of this. Definitely, if you're a male out there, come talk to Bob. You can see he is an open, honest man. And I truly believe you can trust him. And as he said, maybe you're having a hard time trusting anyone right now, but this man right here who's been through it, who's done it and made something beautiful at it, you can trust him. So profiteers out there, let's heal our minds, bodies, and souls together.
This is where we stick you, Bob. Last word, little word of wisdom, something profound for us.
I'm going to go with one of my favorite persons in the world, which is now Saint Teresa, a statement by Mother Teresa. Don't worry about the numbers. And I'm talking like my charity or profiteers or any of that. No. Don't worry about the numbers. Just work with the people that are around you and start with the one that's closest to you.